All right, let's dive into one of history's most terrifying what-if scenarios. We're going to piece together the story of a war that thankfully never happened, but it came unbelievably close. So let's explore what that world might have looked like.
Just picture it for a second. World War II is finally over. The entire planet is just exhausted, trying to pick up the pieces and desperate for some peace. But what if, instead of rebuilding, the Red Army, the single most powerful land army on Earth, just kept on rolling west? What would have happened then?
To really get a grip on how this catastrophe could even unfold, we have to go back to 1945. Yeah, the Allies were the victors, but these were victors who did not trust each other one bit. They were standing on the edge of a totally new kind of war.
It sounds completely insane, right? I mean, to throw the world right back into a war after the Soviet Union had suffered such unimaginable losses. But if you try to get inside Stalin's head, there's a dark, paranoid logic at play. So what was really driving him?
Now, what's really fascinating here is that these 3 points aren't separate things. They're all tangled together in this really dangerous way. Stalin wasn't just paranoid. He was a true believer in his ideology. He was absolutely convinced that a final apocalyptic war with capitalism was going to happen eventually. So when he looked at a shattered Europe and an America that was sending its troops home, he didn't see a chance for peace. No, he saw a fleeting, maybe once-in-a-lifetime window of opportunity. From that dark point of view, attacking first wasn't aggression, it was survival.
And this just puts the staggering imbalance into perspective. On one side, you've got the Soviet Union, an 11 million-man army hardened by the most brutal war in history, with tens of thousands of tanks already parked right on Europe's doorstep. And on the other side, nations that were just plain exhausted, demobilizing as fast as they could, with America's industrial power an entire ocean away. The difference in ready-to-go land power wasn't just big, it was overwhelming.
So, with that massive advantage, the beginning of this war would have been just a terrifying display of pure speed and force, a red tide of steel just washing over Europe.
The strategy would have been a kind of Blitzkrieg in reverse. The whole point wasn't just to take over land, it was to shatter the will of Western Europe, to seize the entire continent before the American industrial juggernaut could even wake up and get into the fight.
And oh man, the assault would have been devastatingly fast. This timeline here shows a continent just crumbling. We're talking months before Soviet tanks are on the edge of Paris. Within a single year, France, Belgium, the Netherlands, all occupied. By the end of '47, the Soviet flag would be flying from the Rhine to the Atlantic, with only a besieged Great Britain holding out against a completely Soviet-dominated Europe.
But here's the thing. Conquering the land is one thing. Actually winning the war, that's something else entirely. And this is the moment the whole conflict pivots, because the Red Army's fatal weaknesses are about to collide with the West's biggest long-term strengths.
So this is the fatal flaw, right? The Soviets could absolutely win a land war in Europe, but they were completely out of their league in a global industrial war. Their Navy? It couldn't stop the flood of American men and material coming across the Atlantic. Their Air Force? No way it could strike the American homeland. But the biggest thing, their economy just could not sustain a long war. Think about it. In the time it took the Soviets to build 1 tank, the US could probably build 3 and then ship them across an ocean the Soviets couldn't control. It's a war of attrition they were destined to lose.
And then there was the trump card, the ultimate game changer. For 4 critical years after World War II, only 1 nation on Earth had nuclear weapons. And let's be honest, after Hiroshima and Nagasaki, there was very little doubt that the US would be willing to use them again to prevent the total conquest of Europe.
Now, the way the bomb would be used here probably wouldn't be about just leveling cities. It would be about destroying the Red Army's ability to even fight. Tactical nuclear strikes on huge troop concentrations, on rail yards, on supply dumps in Poland and East Germany, it would grind the Soviet war machine to a dead stop. It was the one weapon they had absolutely no answer for.
Okay, so with the Soviet Blitzkrieg halted, the whole character of the war would change. It's no longer a lightning campaign. It becomes a brutal, ugly, grinding war of attrition, stretching out across years and continents.
And this is where that long, brutal grind really begins. You can see the shift right here. US forces land in southern Europe, opening up a whole new front and forcing the Soviets to split their armies. At the same time, American air power starts the slow, methodical process of just erasing the supply lines and factories that are feeding the Soviet war machine. This isn't a quick war anymore. It's a siege, and by 1953, the Red Army, starving for fuel and reinforcements, is finally being pushed out of a liberated France and all the way back into Germany.
But the real killer blow? It wouldn't come from the front lines, it would come from behind them. With the Red Army stretched thin and bleeding, the nations they occupied, Poland, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, they would rise up.
And all of a sudden, the Soviets aren't just fighting the West anymore. They're fighting a whole second war in their own backyard.
Fighting a two-front war like that, it's just unsustainable. The Soviet war machine, bled dry on the battlefield and being sabotaged from within, would finally start to collapse. And that leads us to the war's inevitable end.
You know, this chart really sums up the whole story of the war, doesn't it? You can clearly see the three phases. First, that period of just overwhelming Soviet dominance. Then, a brutal stalemate where things are balanced on a knife's edge. And finally, the decisive shift as America's industrial and nuclear power just takes over, leading to a Western victory. So the bottom line is this. The Soviet Union could have won all the opening battles, but it was always destined to lose the war. The conflict would probably sputter out around 1955, maybe not with a total surrender, but a ceasefire. The West would have won, but at an unimaginable price, leaving Europe a nuclear-scarred ruin.
And that's the final, haunting question we're left with, isn't it? A victory was probably inevitable, but it would have been the definition of a Pyrrhic victory. After nearly a decade of brutal warfare, with atomic bombs used on European soil, what would that freedom even look like? What kind of world would even be left?